I didn't find out my mother was a criminal from the police. I found out because she tried to recruit me into it. She looked me in the eyes and told me she'd been stealing from vulnerable people for 30 years, and then asked me to join her. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you're subscribed, because this story only gets darker from here. The day I realized the truth about my mother was the day I lost her forever. My name is Sarah. I grew up in what I thought was a perfect home. My father died when I was 3, so I don't remember him at all. My mother, Patricia, told me he was a wonderful man who worked himself to death trying to provide for us. She said he died of a heart attack at 34, leaving us with nothing but debt and memories. That story became the foundation of our entire lives. My mother used it to explain everything: why we never had money for vacations, why she had to work 2 jobs, why she was always so stressed, so tired, so angry sometimes. I grew up believing that we were 2 survivors, clinging to each other against a cruel world that had already taken so much from us. She was a nurse at a nursing home during the day and cleaned offices at night. I remember being 6 years old and sitting in the back seat of our beat-up Toyota while she drove between jobs. She'd buy me a Happy Meal and tell me to eat slow, make it last, because we couldn't afford another one. I'd fall asleep in that car, waking up only when she carried me into our small apartment at midnight. I never questioned any of it. Why would I? She was my mother, the only parent I had, the woman who bandaged my scraped knees and checked for monsters under my bed. When you're a child, you don't analyze your parents' stories. You just believe them. By the time I was 10, I was helping her clean those office buildings. She'd give me a spray bottle and a rag, and I'd wipe down desks while she vacuumed. She told me we were a team, that we had to stick together because nobody else would help us, that the world was full of people who wanted to take advantage of us, so we could never trust anyone outside our little unit. That isolation became our normal. I didn't have friends over because our apartment was embarrassing. I didn't join after-school activities because they cost money we didn't have. I learned to be alone, to be quiet, to not want things that other kids had. But there was one thing I did want, desperately: college. I was a good student, despite everything. I studied in the library until closing time because it was warm and quiet there. I got straight A's because I had nothing else to do, and I started dreaming about escape, about scholarships and dorm rooms and the future where I didn't have to count every penny. When I got a full ride to State University, I thought my mother would be proud. Instead, she cried for 3 days. She said I was abandoning her, that she had sacrificed everything for me, and now I was leaving her alone with nothing, that I was selfish, just like my father. I almost didn't go. I really almost stayed. But my high school counselor, Mrs. Henderson, pulled me aside and told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Sarah, you're allowed to have a life. Your mother's struggles are not your fault, and saving her is not your job." I went to college. It was the hardest and best thing I've ever done. My mother called me every day, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming, always making me feel guilty. But I made friends for the first time. I learned that not everyone lived like we had. I met people whose parents encouraged them, supported them, celebrated their successes instead of resenting them. And I met David. He was in my economics class, smart and kind and patient in a way I'd never experienced. His family had money, not crazy wealth, but comfortable. His parents owned a small chain of restaurants. When he took me home for Thanksgiving my junior year, I watched this mother hug him just for coming home. She'd cooked all day and kept saying how proud she was of him. I cried in his bathroom that night, not even sure why. David and I got serious. We talked about our future, about moving to the city after graduation, about building something together, and I knew I had to tell my mother. I was 21 and I was still terrified of her reaction. I drove home that weekend, my stomach in knots. She lived in the same apartment, still working the same job, still telling the same stories about how hard everything was. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her about David, about his family, about our plans. She listened with this strange, frozen expression. Then she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "So," she said, "you found yourself a rich boy, just like I always knew you would. Leave your poor mother behind and go live the high life." I tried to explain that David wasn't rich, that his family was just normal, that I wasn't leaving her behind, but she wasn't listening. She stood up and started pacing, talking faster and faster about how men like that would use me up and throw me away, how I'd get pregnant and he'd deny the baby, how I'd come crawling back to her. with nothing, just like she always knew I would. Then she stopped and looked at me with tears in her eyes. But they weren't sad tears. They were angry tears. "You know what your father did before he died?" she asked. "He gambled away our savings. He took a second mortgage on this apartment without telling me. I had to hide money in a coffee can just to feed you. And now you're going to trust some man with your future?" I didn't know what to say. I'd never heard that version of the story before. I'd never heard anything about gambling or hidden money. But I was so desperate for her approval, so desperate to stop the fight, that I just apologized. I said I'd be careful. I said I'd always take care of her. I said I'd never abandon her. She hugged me then, tight and long, and whispered that I was all she had, that I was the only good thing in her life, that she couldn't survive if I left her. I went back to school and I didn't mention David again, not to her. I kept my relationship separate, hidden, ashamed. David didn't understand why I never invited him to meet her, why I always made excuses, but I couldn't explain it without sounding crazy, without admitting that my mother had some kind of hold on me that I couldn't break. We graduated. David got a job at a consulting firm. I got hired at a marketing agency. We moved in together, and I finally felt like an adult, like my own person. I started therapy, though I told my mother I was just seeing a doctor for stress. I started to understand that our relationship wasn't normal, that the guilt and fear I felt weren't healthy, that I was allowed to have boundaries, but I still couldn't cut her off. Every time I tried to pull away, she'd have a crisis. She'd get sick, or her car would break down, or she'd be fired from a job. She was always on the edge of disaster, and I was always the only one who could save her. I sent her money every month. I paid for her car repairs. I covered her rent when she fell behind. David never complained, but I could see he was worried. We were saving for a wedding, trying to build our own future, and I was bleeding money into a bottomless pit. When I turned 24, he proposed. A simple ring, a heartfelt speech, a perfect moment. I said yes through tears of joy, and then I had to tell my mother. I called her instead of visiting. I was too much of a coward to do it in person. When I told her, there was a long silence. Then she said, "I see. Well, I hope you'll be very happy." And she hung up. She didn't answer my calls for 2 weeks. I was frantic, imagining her dead in that apartment, calling the nursing home where she worked, calling hospitals. Finally, she called me back like nothing had happened. She wanted to meet David. She wanted to be part of my wedding. She was sorry for overreacting. I was so relieved that I ignored every warning sign. I ignored the way she insisted on helping with the wedding plans. I ignored the way she criticized every choice I made. The venue was too expensive. The dress was too revealing. The guest list was too long. She wanted to invite people I'd never heard of, family friends from her past who she said were like family to us. I didn't know these people, but I was so desperate for her approval, so desperate to believe she'd changed, that I added them to the list. 23 names of strangers who my mother said had always been there for us. The wedding was beautiful. David's parents paid for most of it, graciously, happily. My mother walked me down the aisle since I had no father, and I cried because I thought it meant she really supported me. I thought it meant she was proud. 3 months after the wedding, David's father had a stroke. He survived, but he needed full-time care. David's mother couldn't manage alone, and David was their only child. We started visiting every weekend, helping where we could, trying to support them through a difficult time. That's when I noticed something strange. My mother started asking about David's parents' finances, not in an obvious way. Little comments, questions about their house, their savings, their will. She said she was just worried about us, about what would happen if they needed expensive care for years. She said she was a nurse. She knew how these things went. She was just trying to help. I told David, and he laughed it off. "Your mom's just being practical," he said. "She sees a lot of this at work." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My mother had never been practical. She had been emotional, dramatic, always operating from fear and desperation. This new version of her, calculating and cold, didn't fit. Then David's mother called me at work. She sounded strange, shaky. She asked if I could come over that evening, alone. She needed to talk to me about something important. I found her sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of her. Bank statements, investment records, insurance policies. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, "Sarah, I think your mother is trying to steal from us." I wanted to defend her automatically. I wanted to say it was impossible, that my mother would never, that there had to be some mistake. But I looked at those papers and I saw my mother's name on documents she should never have touched. I saw signatures that looked like David's father's, but shaky, wrong. I saw changes to beneficiary forms, to power of attorney documents, all dated within the last 2 months. How did she get these? I asked. David's mother told me the story. My mother had started visiting, unannounced, bringing food, offering to help with David's father's care. She'd been so kind, so helpful, so knowledgeable about medical needs. She'd gradually become a regular presence in their home, and then she started asking questions about their finances, offering to help organize their papers, to make things easier for them. They trusted her. Why wouldn't they? She was my mother. She was family. But David's mother had noticed small things missing first. Jewelry she rarely wore. Cash from a drawer she kept for emergencies. Then she'd found my mother going through their filing cabinet alone, and something had felt wrong enough that she'd started checking everything. What she found was a systematic attempt to gain control of their assets. My mother had convinced David's father, in his weakened state, to sign documents he didn't understand. She'd diverted small amounts of money to accounts she controlled. She'd taken out a life insurance policy on him with herself as the beneficiary. It wasn't huge amounts yet. It was careful, gradual, designed to look like help rather than theft. But it was theft, and it was planned to get much bigger. I sat there listening, and something broke inside me. Not just the shock of what my mother had done, but the realization that I wasn't surprised. Not really. Deep down, some part of me had always known she was capable of this. Had known that her stories didn't add up, that her crises were too convenient, that her love came with a price tag. But I had ignored it. For 20 years, I had ignored it because I needed to believe I had a mother who loved me, because the alternative was too lonely to face. I told David's mother I would handle it, I would fix it, I would make sure my mother never came near them again. And then I would figure out what to do about the money she'd already taken. I confronted my mother that night. I went to her apartment and I laid out everything I'd learned. I didn't yell. I was too hurt, too hollow for yelling. I just asked her why. Why David's parents? Why now? Why destroy the one good thing I'd finally built? She didn't deny it. That was the worst part. She sat there on her worn couch, and she looked at me with something like pity. "You really don't understand, do you?" she said. "You think you built something? You think this life you have is real?" She stood up and started pacing, the same way she had when I told her about David years ago. "Your father didn't die of a heart attack, Sarah. He died because he found out what I was doing. He was going to turn me in, so I had to stop him." I couldn't process what she was saying. I kept shaking my head, telling her to stop, that she wasn't making sense. But she kept talking, each word another crack in the foundation of my entire life. "He found the accounts. He found the money I was moving from the nursing home residents. He didn't understand that I was taking care of us, that I was making sure we'd never be poor again. He was going to ruin everything, so I gave him too much of his heart medication. It looked natural. The doctors never questioned it." She said it so calmly, like she was telling me about a grocery list or a TV show, like killing my father was just a practical decision, necessary and regrettable, but ultimately justified. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Sarah. 30 years of making sure the people who don't appreciate their money end up sharing it with those who need it. Those old people in the nursing home, they don't even know where they are half the time. Their families never visit. That money would just sit there, wasted, unless someone smart took advantage of the opportunity." She turned to me with a smile that made my skin crawl. "And now you have a chance to be smart too. David's parents have more than they need, more than they'll ever spend. And you're their daughter-in-law now. You have access. We could do this together, you and me. Build a real future, not this pathetic little apartment and entry-level job you've settled for." I don't remember leaving. I don't remember driving home. I just remember showing up at my own door and David catching me as I collapsed. I remember shaking so hard I couldn't speak, couldn't explain, couldn't do anything but cry. When I finally told him everything, he held me and said we'd figure it out together. But I could see the fear in his eyes, not just of what my mother had done, but of what she might still do, of what she might do to us if we tried to stop her. We spent 3 days planning. 3 days of legal consultations, of gathering evidence, of preparing for what we knew would be an ugly fight. David's parents were devastated but determined to press charges. They had the documents, the bank records, the testimony of a financial advisor who'd warned them about suspicious activity. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. My mother was careful. She was experienced. She'd been doing this for 3 decades without getting caught. If we wanted to stop her for good, we needed more. We needed to show a pattern, a history, proof that this wasn't a one-time mistake but a lifetime of predation. So I did something that still haunts me. I went back to her. I pretended to consider her offer. I sat in that apartment and listened to her plans for our future together, mother and daughter, partners in crime. I recorded everything on my phone, every confession, every detail of how she operated, every name of every victim she could remember. She was proud of it, proud of how smart she was, how she'd never been caught, how she'd built a comfortable life of the suffering of people who trusted her. She told me about the nursing home residents she'd robbed, the elderly clients she'd helped with their finances, the husband she killed when he became inconvenient. I gathered evidence for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of pretending to be the daughter she'd always wanted, the one who would finally understand her, who would join her instead of abandoning her. It was the hardest acting job of my life. Every smile felt like poison. Every shared laugh felt like betrayal of everything decent in me. But it worked. I got enough to put her away for life. Recordings, documents, the location of hidden accounts containing over $2 million stolen from decades of victims. I turned it all over to the police and the district attorney, and I testified against her in the grand jury proceedings. She was arrested at work, led out of the nursing home in handcuffs while her co-workers watched. I wasn't there to see it. I couldn't bear to. But I heard about it from the detective who called to tell me the case was moving forward. The trial took 8 months. My mother refused to plead guilty, refused to admit any wrongdoing. She testified in her own defense, charming and tearful, painting herself as a struggling single mother who'd only ever tried to help people. She said I was a confused daughter who'd been manipulated by my wealthy in-laws into turning against my own family. For a moment I was afraid the jury would believe her. She was that good, that practiced in making people see what she wanted them to see. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the testimony of victims who'd finally been found, the recording of her confessing to my father's murder. When that played in court, the jury's faces changed. I saw them understand, finally, what kind of person they'd been listening to. She was convicted on all counts. The murder charge meant life without parole would have been possible, but the prosecution had focused primarily on the financial crimes where the evidence was strongest. She got 8 years, with the possibility of more charges pending in other jurisdictions where she'd operated. I was there for the sentencing. I sat in the gallery while the judge spoke about predation and betrayal of trust, about the particular evil of those who target the vulnerable. My mother turned around once, looked right at me, and mouthed 2 words: "I win." I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought it was just more manipulation, more of her endless games. But I understand now. She meant that she'd made me into her, that by betraying her, by gathering evidence in deception, by sacrificing our relationship for justice, I'd become exactly what she'd always been, someone willing to do whatever it took to get what they wanted, someone who could pretend to love while planning destruction. She was wrong. I know she was wrong. But some nights I wake up wondering if there's a difference between us that matters, if the ends really do justify the means when the monster is real and the danger is immediate, if I can call myself good while knowing what I had to become to stop her. David tells me I'm being too hard on myself, that I did what I had to do, that I saved people, that I chose justice over blood. His parents recovered most of their money and sold their restaurants to retire somewhere quiet and safe. We're still married, still building that future I dreamed about, though now I know that dreams come with shadows attached. I started a foundation last year. We help families investigate suspected financial abuse of elderly relatives, providing resources and legal support that I wish had existed for David's parents. I work with law enforcement now, training them to recognize the signs of predatory caregivers. I use what I learned from my mother to stop others like her, and I visit my father. I found his grave last year in a cemetery my mother never took me to. I bring flowers and I tell him I'm sorry. Sorry that I believed her stories for so long. Sorry that I never questioned why we never visited, why his name was rarely spoken, why his death was always a weapon she used against me rather than a loss we mourned together. I don't visit my mother. She's eligible for parole in 5 years, and I've already told the board that I oppose her release. I've told them everything she did, everything she is, everything she made me see about the world and about myself. I don't know if they'll listen. I don't know if it matters. What I know is this. I spent 20 years believing that love meant sacrifice, that family meant loyalty without question, that my mother's pain justified anything she did to survive it. I spent 20 years being wrong. The hardest thing I ever did wasn't betraying her. It was admitting that she never loved me. Not the way I needed. Not the way that would have made any of this impossible. She loved what I could do for her. She loved the reflection of herself she saw in my eyes. She loved the control. Real love doesn't ask you to choose between it and your conscience. Real love doesn't make you complicit in evil to prove your devotion. Real love wants you to be whole, to be free, to be safe, even if that safety comes at a cost to the relationship. I have that now, with David, with his parents who forgave me for bringing that danger into their lives, with the friends I finally allowed myself to make, the community I finally allowed myself to join. I have love that doesn't cost me pieces of my soul, but I still check under the bed sometimes, still flinch when the phone rings unexpectedly, still hear her voice in my head when I have to make a hard choice, telling me that I'm selfish, that I'm abandoning someone, that I'm just like her. Maybe I always will. Maybe that's the price of survival, of waking up from a nightmare that lasted 20 years and realizing the monster was the person who should have protected you from monsters. I don't have a neat ending for this story. No moment of perfect closure where everything makes sense. Just a life I'm still building, day by day, choice by choice. A life where I get to decide who I am, what I value, how I love. My mother thought she won because she made me hurt her to stop her, because she forced me to become someone who could deceive and betray, even for good reasons. But she forgot one thing. She forgot that I could choose what came after, that I could take the strength she forced me to find and use it to help instead of harm, that I could break the cycle instead of continuing it. I'm not her daughter anymore, not in the way that matters. I'm my own person, finally, painfully, completely, and that, more than any prison sentence, is what she can never forgive, what she can never understand, what she can never take away. The last time I saw her in that courtroom, she mouthed those words at me. I win. But she was already in handcuffs, already exposed, already finished, and I was walking out into sunlight, into a life I'd built with my own hands, into a future that belonged to me. So let me correct something I said at the beginning. I didn't put my mother in prison. She put herself there with 30 years of choices that valued greed over humanity. I just finally stopped making excuses for her. I finally opened my eyes. I finally grew up. And if that's betrayal, then I'll wear that word like a badge. Because some things are worth betraying. Some loyalties are cages, and the only way to be free is to pick the lock and walk out, no matter who screams from the other side that you're breaking their heart. My heart is whole now. For the first time in my life, it's whole. And nobody, not even the woman who gave me life, gets to take that from me, not ever again.